people that want to apply for a job, for a management position with the city, they have to apply.
Right.
But for interim, it's different. Okay, and I started that conversation.
Okay.
In order for me to get support, I have to communicate with you all one at a time, because I can't have three or two at a time and myself being three.
Okay.
So that's why it started the way it did. So if you were on the end finding out about it, that might be how it happened, but you gotta get support. If you don't get support, you can't move forward. So go ahead.
Okay, well, my concern is not support for Mr. Bass. My concern is the process, that there's a process in place that the city drives through our HR department. Have you been involved in any of these discussions at this point? Have you?
No.
Okay, so that's my concern, is that there's a process in place that you go through to find people that work with the city. And that process has been in place for a long time, and that it should work that way. I understand you're looking at someone who is a senior officer within the organization, but you're having done that. If it's just the two of you, that's interesting, and the third person and whatnot. Have you had any discussions about Mr. Bass yet?
I got his resume.
You saw, I read the resume as well. So, but really the concern here is that if we're going to stop and talk about him as an individual, have you considered others? Have you interviewed others? Have you advertised for the position? How do you know that he's the right guy?
What's the process that you're describing that I guess being head of human resources would conduct? Would it be references, resumes, letters of recommendation, that sort of thing?
The normal process.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The normal process for a position that we're going to advertise is typically we'll advertise internally for like 3 days to see if their internal candidates are available. And then if there's somebody within the organization, we'll do interviews from there. Otherwise, we will execute an advertisement recruitment search, outside for external resources. For general positions, say if it's a non-exempt hourly type position, that may be a shorter search, but for the executive level positions, that usually takes about a month so that we can get the appropriate ads in and so forth. Once we get that, we have our Thomasville HR jobs. They can apply through that mechanism, upload their resumes, complete everything, and then we can know who's, based on that, just kind of a computer generated to see who's qualified and not. But we also look at that individually, and then we would start with that would include references and so forth. So after we do an initial assessment, we would start looking at references, making some preliminary calls. That typically is done in human resources with me or one of my staff. And once we do that, if there are no red flags, we will go back and kind of cull it out and see, first tier, second tier, third tier, so that we can get an accurate assessment of, who might be qualified and so forth, and then bring that to either the department head or if there's a committee of, people that are looking for, that particular position.
Would all that apply to an interim?
Yeah, that's my big question.
I've never done a search for an interim before.
Okay, let me speak. Ms. Flowers, I understand your concerns. You have valid concerns. Interim superintendent, general superintendent for utilities. There's nobody in the city of Thomasville that can hire that person other than us. There's nobody in the city that would be over that person other than the city council. If you had a city manager, a full-time city manager, it would be equivalent. One would be over the other. So in order to get us prepared to hire somebody permanent, it's in the best interest of the city council to appoint an interim general superintendent of utilities so that person can help us select that person.
Okay.
As well as a committee of some citizens here in town can help us get to that point. But it makes sense to get started getting that process rolling. So we're not doing anything wrong.
Well, I'm not saying anything wrong. I just want clarity, okay?
Okay.
Someone showed up in a meeting, and then we got a resume. So I just wanted to clarify what all that means, and we're getting there. So your suggestion of an interim in this role would be a consultant to help us define the role for that future full-time position?
No.
I'm not saying that it got to be a
employee. Be an employee.
They get what?
He would be an employee.
He would be an employee of the city. Okay.
And I'm not sure how much of this we're supposed to be discussing, there's already
Every
been a
bit
name
of it,
now.
every bit of it, because the only thing we can do in
That's
closed
Tim
session
would
is.
say about that.
Yeah, I think if, in some degree, insofar as whether or not an executive session could be had or not, would depend on how Mr. Bass or any other candidate is going to be employed, and I use that not in the technical sense, but rather whether they're an employee and they get a W-2, or whether they're a consultant, an independent contractor. I'm of the opinion that as far as closing a meeting, you would not be able to do that to discuss engaging a consultant or an independent contractor. Now, you would, in theory, be able to do that with an employee if you look at that Meetings Act, but as consultants, independent contractors, I don't think the Act contemplates going into an executive session for that.
Okay. So that's good.
I see it as an employee position. I don't see any reason to do anything different, whether we choose the person who's already been named or somebody else.
Mr. Flowers, the reason that you didn't get introduced to him as a group for all of us, because our meeting ran like 2 hours and 50 minutes. Mr. Hubfield had to leave early. Mr. Marvis said he had something he had to do, so they were gone.
I get that, and it's really not so much about whether or not Mr. Bass was here, it was that the fact that he was here and no others, and that the process that we described, you vet a whole lot of people. If we're going to employ someone to work within the context of our city in our very, very important revenue side of our city, shouldn't we look at multiple candidates for jobs and look at them in a way that, as was just described by our HR director, that we go forth and advertise and get all the best folks out there, then vet them and then work it down to a position. Interim but employed, whether that sounds like consultant but employed the way you described it before, because you need some help with defining the role long term. So I don't know. So what is interim? Are you suggesting this is a 90-day engagement? Is it a 4-year engagement? What do you think is in interim?
At least 6 months.
And we can discuss that. I mean.
Okay.
And I think time is of the essence with a position of that importance.
Okay.
It's not
Mr.
gonna be
Mayor and
a-
Council, may I say something?
Go ahead.
And of course, I may get an email tomorrow and this will all change, but when you selected me, asked me to be interim city manager, you said it was based on my expertise and the experience that I can bring to this position, for whatever period of time that you would like me to serve in this position. Chris White has been my colleague for several years. I have the utmost respect for his technical ability, his administrative abilities, and I would like you all to consider, just as you did with me based on my experiences, that you would consider Mr. White for the interim utility superintendent. He knows the staff, he knows our processes, he knows everything about this, and I think to bring in someone else who doesn't have that expertise with our organization could hinder us and affect us in ways that we might not be prepared for. And again, I'm speaking professionally, but I'm also speaking from the heart, because I've worked with him and I trust his judgment, and I would certainly like to put that out for you to consider.
I can respect that, and I have no problem with that. As I told Mr. White, that he can apply when this position is advertised and applications are being accepted for a permanent general superintendent utilities position, he should apply. The council today, which is called the new council, we have to know that we have people that feel that they can trust us and we can trust them. We don't feel like we've had that so far. We don't, so we need some help. And also, when I say help, not only on the trust issue, but we need people that has experience that really can help us, because we got 2 new guys, and he's never been in the utilities committee. He just started coming to the utilities committee. I'm the only one. Had I stepped down and not ran for re-election, Mr. Beverly lost. Who knew about utilities as far as the commission? That's why I brought the group together, and we're a utility commission. So, not second guessing him, not doing anything to undermine you. I have 1 vote sitting at this table on everything that come across it. I might be the mayor, but I have 1 vote. So I move forward with what we started. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have any more questions, Ms. Flowers?
I've got a lot of questions.
Carry on.
Okay, so, Mr. Bass, has experience in the cable and telephony area as well? I know he's with MEAG and.
What
with
experience he
electrical
doesn't
side.
have, there's people in this room on staff that will have.
That's where he
experience.
still will be the assistant superintendent of utilities.
Chris, did you have a comment?
I don't.
Okay, I just saw you gesture, okay.
I feel it's redundant. I think we have Chris here as well, who's shown for decades his dedication and experience and expertise, and bringing in a third party, I don't think he brings value. I don't know his background, but I don't know that if interim means we're still seeking the full-time position, then if you want to bring someone in as a consultant and review and understand where we are and give you guys more comfort with what our status is, that makes sense. But to hire someone, he lives in Atlanta, is he planning to move here?
Ms. Flowers, key pads come highly recommended by some
By
folks
certain
within
people.
GMA, MEAG, Electric Cities, Georgia.
I hear that. He doesn't know our particular market. He doesn't do the other side of what we do for our utilities. And so coming in to give us more advice on the electrical side, and that's his area of expertise, I don't understand how we're gaining anything through that. We have been working with MEAG for however many years it is, decades again. Mr. White's been in the middle of that, and I don't understand how that makes sense. And I also don't understand how this is a single candidate that's being brought in and being proposed without all the other due diligence that we would do for the full-time position. We have a consultant coming to town that represents the Vincent Institute that's going to help us talk about what to do with the city manager. This is a co-equal responsibility. Why are we in such a hurry to put someone in place? There's no disaster pending. There's no big challenges out there within the utility department. Why are we in such a hurry to do that when we recognize the importance of this position, as you both have stated, and when we have this consultant from Vincent coming down to help us understand the process and what they can do for us? That's my question. Why are we in such a
Here's
hurry?
where I'm at. If it's being discussed as an employee, then I think by rule it's supposed to be an executive session, and then we can vote.
But they're not an employee.
Well, yes, he is. Well,
No, they're
I'm
not.
talking about
He's not an employee. My understanding of executive session is when you talk about a future employee, is you can only talk about compensation and things of that nature, and you can actually interview that candidate. And our attorney sitting over here, he hasn't stopped me yet.
Well, I think the distinction is with closing and going into executive session, whether it's about personnel matters or litigation, what have you, is that you may close, but you don't have to close.
Right.
That's the difference there.
Okay.
We got a comment back there.
Hold on, Terry, you got something?
Not though.
Oh, okay. You can do it.
Just the process. I think if you read, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you read open records and open meetings law, you go into executive session and talk about this, you're bound by other things when you come out, like a 14-day waiting period to produce all those documents. And the open records law speaks to 3 people. Now, Tim can guide that, 3 candidates. And it doesn't, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it speaks to interim at all. An employee is an employee is an employee is an employee, even if it's an employee with a certain period of time. So I think you ought to examine that. Tim can give you that guidance in closed session. But I think when you go in closed session and talk about this, it does put additional requirements on what you have to do under the open records law and the open meetings law. And I have concerns about another, well, I don't know what you're going to pay him, but another salary that you're adding to the budget. That's your call.
Thank you. And I've got faith in Mr. Sanders to guide us, keep us in the legal
Yeah.
arena.
Ken.
Mr. Berry was an interim, at Cairo and in Albany, and he's probably the person who would know how they were hired, or, you know, he worked there, he was in Cairo for a while, but he
He's
worked in
right.
Albany a long time. Yeah, that is, it was a long time, so he's the only person in here that's experienced it, he might be able to give you some help.
Mr. Flowers, anything else on Mr. Bass?
I guess we'll have to go to closed session and get more answers, so.
Okay. Well,
Make a
I'm not
motion
sure
to
we're gonna
close
talk
session.
anymore about
Sir.
Mr. Bass.
Make a motion.
You making a motion?
Go in closed
Close it.
session.
Got a motion on the floor to go in closed session. Got a second. Ladies and gentlemen, we close. I tell you what, they can stay here and we'll move. Well, no, they can go ahead and move. 'Cause
Wanna stay
then-
up in a
'cause-
minute?
We're going over.
I didn't wanna
Yeah.
stay
We'll be here 20 minutes.
We're gonna look and see how the crowd is, and then we'll determine if we need to go up or not.
What are you gonna talk about?
In more order, I
Once everybody gets out of the room.
Okay. Probably need you to stay, so I can keep up.
I'm gonna get some more of this stuff.
I'm just waiting to confirm this is off, let y'all know. Trying to pull it up.